Guíligan and the Dreaded Old Man of the Woods. A Christmas Adventure. A long time ago, there was a little boy named Guíligan who lived in a little village high up in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Guíligan was not a happy child. The boys at school picked on him terribly, and he didn't have anyone on his side, not even the teacher. Every day after school, Guíligan would run home before the bullies could start with him. One day, he couldn't quite get away fast enough. The boys were right behind him as he bolted out of the schoolhouse. Guíligan couldn't stand to be beaten up again, so he decided to do something he never did. He decided to take a shortcut through the woods. The children of the town never went into the woods. From a very young age, they were taught to always be good and never go into the forest, because if the old man of the forest found them, he would take them home and eat them for dinner. Guíligan didn't think the others would follow him into the woods, but he was sadly mistaken. The bullies caught up to Guíligan and pushed him down. They were hitting him and punching him, and just when Guíligan thought he couldn't take any more, a booming voice called out, "Hey, what's going on here?" Everything stopped. The boys on top of Guíligan sat frozen, staring at the old man. "Get out of here!" The bullies leapt to their feet and ran screaming back the way they'd come. Guíligan, too, stood up to run, but the old man said, "Wait! I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Guíligan stopped, and slowly he turned around. The old man bared his teeth in a smile, which made him look even scarier with his scraggly hair and long white beard. He was the biggest man Guíligan had ever seen, much bigger than even the largest man in the village. Guíligan began to quake from fear as he approached, and the old man stopped. "It's okay. I'm here to help, that's all," he reassured him. Guíligan nodded and watched, wide-eyed, as he closed the distance between them. "You're hurt," the old man observed. "Come with me, I'll treat your wounds." "Are you going to take me home and eat me for dinner?" squeaked Guíligan. "I'm sorry I came into your woods. I'll never do it again. Please let me go." "Eat you for dinner," said the old man. "Why in the world would I want to do that?" He knelt down so he was at Guíligan's eye level. "My name is Kimo. I know I look kind of scary, but I really do want to help. Come with me. We're not far from my house." Guíligan contemplated this offer. Something in the way Kimo spoke calmed Guíligan's fears. The boys at school, who should have been Guíligan's friends, and the teacher, who should have defended Guíligan from the bullies, were never kind to Guíligan as this old man was being now. "It's nice to meet you, Kimo," said Guíligan. As they walked, Guíligan noticed that there were little crudely constructed tree houses in some of the trees. There were more of them the further they went, and each one was connected to the others, with hanging walkways of precarious design. Running around on the walkways and on the forest floor were people of smaller stature than Guíligan had ever seen before. They were all hard at work, creating or testing various inventions. "Welcome to my home," said Kimo, as they emerged into a clearing, at the center of which was the strangest house Guíligan had ever seen. Unlike the others, this one was not in a tree. It was situated firmly on the ground, but even so, it had a surreal appearance. It was built out of stones and had 3 3/4 floors. That is to say, it had 3 floors and another floor that had not yet been finished. At the same time, there were several attempts to build little towers and lookouts. There were stairs everywhere. Some of the staircases led to some kind of lookout or another, while the main staircase snaked up around the house all the way to the top. "It's a little unconventional, but you can't expect anything else, considering that it was built by these elves," said Kimo, apologetically. Just then, a weird machine that had feet on its wheels came speeding toward them, and Guíligan leapt out of the way just in time. "Sorry!" yelled the little guy who was driving it. Then a box fell from one of the tree houses and exploded. An elf shrieked, and started to douse the flames with a fire extinguisher. "What are you doing?" growled Cosimo. "Stop this nonsense and welcome our guest." There was a flurry of commotion as the creatures obeyed, forming a circle around Cosimo and Guíligan. One of them stepped forward and presented Guíligan with a package. "Welcome, sir. Please accept this gift," he said. "Thanks," said Guíligan, taking the package. All of the elves started jumping up and down. "Open it! Open it!" they cried. Guíligan removed the colored paper and examined the object. It was an air rifle. "Thanks," he said. "I've always wanted one of these." But before he could finish his sentence, Cosimo snatched the rifle away. "What were you thinking?" he admonished the elves. "He'll shoot his eye out." "I'm sorry, sir," said the elf who had given Guíligan the gift. "I was certain that it would work this time." Cosimo shook his head. "Never mind. Go and make something to eat for our guest. Combination number 4. "Very well, sir," said the elf, brightening. And all the creatures hurried to obey the order. "I'm sorry," said Cosimo to Guíligan. "It's just that a lot of their inventions don't work the way they're supposed to." "But it's the thought that counts, right?" said Guíligan. "You're a good kid," said Cosimo, patting Guíligan gently on his shoulder. "Come, let's get your wounds cleaned up." Cosimo treated Guíligan's wounds and then took him up to the 3rd floor of the house, where the dining room was located. Guíligan stared with wide eyes at the spread laid out on the table. Large round plates piled high with spaghetti, covered with multicolored sprinkles and dripping with maple syrup. "What is this?" griped Cosimo. "It's combo number 4, sir," replied one of the elves. Cosimo shook his head. "No, this is not combination number 4. Combination number 4 is spaghetti with tomato sauce." "I'm sorry, sir," said the elf, bowing. "We ran out of tomato sauce, and we had to substitute it with something else." Cosimo grunted in exasperation. "Fine," he said grudgingly. To Guíligan he said, "Okay, well, I guess you may as well eat it, if you want." Guíligan sat down at the table and dug into the unconventional dinner. Cosimo watched him curiously. "Do you like it?" asked Cosimo doubtfully. "I love it!" Guíligan cheered. Cosimo sighed. "Very well, but I don't suppose your mother would approve." Guíligan shrugged and continued eating. After the spaghetti and a big bowl of chocolate pudding, Cosimo took Guíligan back to his home in the village. When they arrived at Guíligan's house, his mum shrieked in panic. "Get away from my son! Let him go!" "But, Mum, he's my friend," protested Guíligan. His mother paid him no attention. "Guíligan, go into the house." "But, Mum—" "Do it!" "I'm sorry, Cosimo," said Guíligan before obeying his mother. "Thanks a lot for today." Cosimo nodded and gave him a weak smile. Guíligan's mum looked at Cosimo, her brow furrowed. "If I find you have touched a single hair on my son's head, I will tell the brute squad and they'll hunt you down and kill you." Guíligan explained to his mother what had happened. He told her that the boys at school were mean to him, and that Cosimo had been the kindest to him of anyone he'd ever met, but she just wouldn't listen. She forbade Guíligan to see the dreaded old man of the woods again. With a heavy heart, Guíligan agreed to do as his mother said. For the next week, he ran straight home after school, every day. He did not go to see Cosimo. He did not even go into the woods. Until one day it happened again. The boys chased after Guíligan, and his only hope of escape was to run into the woods. When he did, the boys broke off their chase, but Guíligan kept running. He ran down the winding path and past the sprawling network of tree houses, and all the way to Cosimo's house. When Cosimo saw Guíligan, he shook his head. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "What else can I do?" protested Guíligan. "My mum doesn't care that the other boys pick on me and that I don't have any friends. I just want to be here where I feel happy and safe." Cosimo watched Guíligan intently, and for a moment he was afraid that Cosimo would send him away. But then Cosimo sighed, shook his head. "Well, maybe you could stay. Not for too long, mind you. Pull up a chair. Have you ever played chess with an elf?" It was the beginning of a close friendship. Every day, Guíligan ran into the woods after school before the bullies could start anything with him. He spent long hours every day with Cosimo and started to make friends with the elves too. There were 4 moose that had also adopted the clearing as their home, and the elves showed Guíligan how they liked to be brushed and fed treats, just like the horses he knew from the stables in town. The place was so magical that it was hard not to lose track of time while he was there. It was like a whole other world where anything could happen. Each day his mother would ask him where he had been, and Guíligan would tell her he had been out having fun with his friends. "I'm so happy you finally found some friends," she told him, giving him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Guíligan felt the sting of guilt for misleading his mum, but he knew that if she knew the truth, she would stop him from going to the one place where he truly belonged. One day, Guíligan and Cosimo were sitting around the fire inside the house, listening to the elves tell stories. It turned out that they were much better at telling stories than they were at making toys and contraptions that worked, and it was almost like they were working an extra spell of magic over both Guíligan and Cosimo. Neither one of them noticed that the sun had already begun setting, and neither one of them realized that it had started snowing until one of the elves excitedly pointed out the window and squealed, "Christmas has arrived!" Then all of the elves started jumping up and down and singing, "Christmas, Christmas, Christmas has arrived, yippee!" But Cosimo said, "Oh no, Guíligan, this is bad. It's not safe for you to go home now." "Can I sleep here tonight?" asked Guíligan hopefully. Cosimo thought for a moment. "That would be the safest thing," he said, "but your mum would kill me." "She doesn't know I'm here," agreed Guíligan. "I really do have to get home." When they got outside, the snow was already so deep that Guíligan couldn't even walk. Cosimo picked him up and carried him, though even he was stumbling through drifts that came up to his knees. Guíligan buried his face and hands into Cosimo's chest to keep warm and shield himself from the driving snow. Cosimo walked on and on for what seemed like forever. "Are we almost out of the woods?" Guíligan asked. "Yes, almost there," Cosimo replied. Guíligan looked around, but he couldn't see where they were. He couldn't even see any trees, and he thought that maybe they had already exited the woods. But then where was the village? Cosimo trudged on, and Guíligan realized that his feet were so cold that he couldn't feel his toes. "Are we there yet?" he asked, knowing full well that they were not. "Almost," said Cosimo. His voice sounded weaker, and he was breathing heavily. A little while later, Guíligan was relieved to see a light. "Cosimo, go that way," he said. "What?" "I don't think it's that way," said Cosimo. He sounded confused. "Cosimo, the village is over there. My house is over there. We have to go that way." To Guíligan's immense relief, Cosimo turned and went in the direction of the village. He was stumbling along more slowly now. Every step was a colossal effort, but by some miracle they arrived at Guíligan's home. Cosimo was trudging up the walk when he stumbled and fell. Guíligan rolled out of his arms and into the snow. "Cosimo, we made it! Cosimo, get up! We made it!" said Guíligan, shaking Cosimo's shoulder, but his friend was not responding. It was like he had fallen asleep. "Cosimo!" Guíligan screamed, shaking his shoulder, desperately trying to wake him up. He sat back, catching his breath, and in the distance he heard someone calling his name. "Guíligan! Guíligan!" "Over here!" screamed Guíligan. "I'm over here and my friend needs help. Please, I think he's dying." There was a flurry of activity as the brute squad, who had been out looking for Guíligan, helped Cosimo to his feet and guided him into the house. Guíligan ran over to hug his mum. "Guíligan, where have you been? The whole town has been out looking for you." "I'm so sorry," said Guíligan, bursting into tears. "We lost track of time and the storm started. Cosimo helped me get home. Now look at him. He might die, and if he does, it will be all my fault." That night, Guíligan slept on the floor beside Cosimo's bed. When he awoke the next morning, he looked up to see Cosimo peering down at him. "Hello there, little guy." "You're alive!" exclaimed Guíligan, jumping up and throwing his arms around Cosimo. Then he ran to the doorway and called, "Mum, he's awake!" A moment later, his mother appeared at the doorway. Cosimo was trying to get out of bed, but she said, No, don't get up. You have to rest and recover. Cosimo looked surprised and relieved as he lay back in the bed. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I shouldn't be here. Guíligan's mother shook her head and her eyes filled with tears. I don't want to think what would have happened if you hadn't brought Guíligan back home. You kept my son safe. Guíligan began to cry. It's all my fault. If I had listened to you, Mum, this wouldn't have happened. No, I'm sorry, Guíligan, said his mother, kneeling to give him a hug. You told me how hard things were for you, and I didn't listen. I was scared because of all those things we heard about the man who lived in the woods, but now I see that those rumors were utter nonsense. By the end of 2 weeks, Cosimo was well enough to go home. Guíligan begged him to stay longer, but Cosimo said he didn't want to outstay his welcome. Besides that, the elves had followed and had been making themselves at home outside Guíligan's house. Already various strange structures and inventions had been constructed and erected here and there in the yard, and even in the neighbors' yards. The moose were there too, making their own kind of trouble. Mrs. Jones had been over that morning, complaining that one of them had put its antler through her kitchen window. I'd better go before there's any more trouble, said Cosimo, looking embarrassed. Then he called out to his companions and announced that it was time to go, and that the elves should dismantle their creations. The elves obeyed, kind of. A few hours later, Guíligan and his mum accompanied Cosimo outside to say goodbye. All of the crazy contraptions had been taken down, but the elves had used the materials to create something else. What is this? Grumped Cosimo at the sight of the monstrosity that had appeared in front of the house. It's a sleigh, explained one of the elves. To give you a ride home, squeaked another. Cosimo shook his head and got into the odd-looking vehicle. I just hope it doesn't fall apart or blow up, he said. It was almost Christmas, and Guíligan wanted more than anything in the world for Cosimo to come back and spend Christmas Eve with him and his mum. It didn't take much to convince her. By now, she had grown to love Cosimo like a family member. Guíligan's little feet couldn't run fast enough through the woods to find Cosimo and officially deliver the invitation. What about the elves? Said Cosimo. Guíligan paused. The elves? I have to ask my mum about the elves. I'm kidding, said Cosimo, laughing and pulling Guíligan into a bear hug. You know the elves will come whether they're invited or not. On Christmas Eve, Cosimo arrived early to help with the food. They had turkey with stuffing and cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes with gravy that had little mushrooms in it. Dessert was fruit cake, Cosimo's contribution. Guíligan ate it in small bites with a polite smile on his face. Cosimo laughed. You don't like it, he said. Yes, I like it, insisted Guíligan. Well, said Cosimo, in that case you can eat it all. I, on the other hand, will eat this one. He took out a box that he had hidden under his chair and put it on the table. He lifted the lid and revealed a chocolate cake covered in whipped cream and decorated with chocolate sprinkles and candied cherries. That looks delicious, yelled Guíligan. Can I have a piece? No, said Cosimo. This one is mine. You can have the other one. Aww. Well, conceded Cosimo, maybe you could have a little bit, but on one condition. What? That you give me the fruitcake, since it's my favorite. Why didn't you say so before? Exclaimed Guíligan, and everyone laughed. Later that night, Guíligan was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. He was too excited about Christmas. He listened to the winter wind, hoping to hear something more, maybe the jingling of bells, but as he continued listening, he became aware of other sounds coming from inside the house. He leapt out of bed and slipped through the door. As he went into the living room, Guíligan was surprised to see Cosimo standing next to the Christmas tree. He had lit the candles and was sitting on the floor eating the gingerbread cookies that Guíligan had left there for Santa Claus. Hey, what are you doing? Said Guíligan. Those cookies were for Santa. His friend looked up, surprised. Hello, Guíligan. Shouldn't you be in bed? I couldn't sleep, Guíligan answered, and neither could you, I guess. Well, Guíligan, you know that I never sleep on the night before Christmas. It's the most important work day of the year for me. Uh-huh, okay, said Guíligan, a little annoyed. Now you're playing Santa Claus, right? This isn't funny, Cosimo. What's going on, Guíligan? Who are you talking to? Guíligan turned and saw... Who? He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Cosimo was there looking at him. If you're over there, then who is this? Said Guíligan. He turned back to look at the man who was eating the cookies. Santa Claus? Asked Guíligan. Santa Claus smiled at him, and Guíligan looked back at his friend, who was also looking in wonder at Santa. Am I dreaming? He said. Cosimo? Said Santa. Cosimo Kringle? Well, look at that. I spend the whole rest of the year looking for my long-lost twin brother, and I end up finding him on the day I'm too busy to look. I don't understand, said Cosimo. I mean, I knew I was adopted, but I never imagined I was related to Santa Claus. Call me Chris, said Santa. You're family, after all. The brothers spent several long hours talking about their family and their past. Their parents had been very poor and had only been able to support one child, so for that reason they had given Cosimo up for adoption. But they always regretted it, explained Chris. I promised my mother before she died that I would find her lost son. Cosimo was silent for a moment, sipping his hot chocolate. I still can't believe it, squealed Guíligan. You're Santa Claus's twin. Chocolatey sprinkles, exclaimed Chris. You are Santa Claus's twin, and I'm Santa Claus. It's Christmas Eve, and I should be out delivering presents. He stood up and started pacing around. I'm not going to be able to finish in time. Oh, how could I have lost track of time like this? Cosimo and I could help you, suggested Guíligan. Cosimo looked at him in surprise. How are we going to do that? You have a sleigh too, remember? A sleigh? Me? And then his expression changed. You mean that thing the elves made? So Chris took them in his sleigh back to Cosimo's house. The elves danced and jumped for joy when the sleigh landed in the clearing. I see you have elves too, observed Chris. It seems to be genetic that we attract them, part of being a Kringle. One of Cosimo's elves led them over to the contraption that was supposed to pass for a sleigh. This is pathetic, said Cosimo. It's really embarrassing. The sleigh that the elves had built for Cosimo was very different from Chris's sleigh. It was rough and uneven, with one side higher than the other. It had poles sticking up on the lower side, and at the top of each one was a small trumpet. There was a flag on the back with the words, Cosimo is the best, painted in such a bright red that it almost glowed. The sleigh was painted red and green. The left side was green, and the right side was red, with silver garlands hanging decoratively from it. Don't you like it, sir? Said one of the elves, sounding hurt. Cosimo moved his hand in a gesture of appeasement. I know you've done your best, and I thank you. It will be good enough for tonight, although I would like to work together with you on the decorative details next time, okay? Yes, sir, replied the elf. Okay, now how are we going to pull it? Asked Cosimo. As though by magic, the 4 moose appeared at his side. Cosimo jumped in surprise. You guys want to help too, eh? Said Cosimo, stroking the flank of the moose closest to him. Okay, then let's go. He turned toward Chris. What do you do to get your reindeer to fly? In response, Chris took something out of his pocket and threw it to the moose. The small objects sparkled as they flew through the air and fell to the ground. The moose sniffed the multicolored balls and then ate them. Cosimo watched them for a moment, expecting something to happen. And can they fly now? He asked. You'll see, replied Chris. We can't waste another moment. He turned to his own elves, which were seated in his sleigh. Itchy, Titchy, go with my brother and show him how this is done, okay? Yes, sir, chorused the 2 elves, getting out of Santa's sleigh and running toward Cosimo's. Chris guided the moose over and said to the elves, Hook up the moose, please. As his companions were doing this, Chris strode back toward his own sleigh and unhooked the lead reindeer. Rudolph is going to help you too, he said. It's Rudolph! It's Rudolph! Squealed Guíligan, jumping up and down. Can I pet him? Sure, said Chris, but do it quickly and then get into the sleigh. You mean I can go too? The boy exclaimed, beside himself with excitement. As long as your mom gives you permission, Cosimo's going to need all the help he can get. Mom, please can I go with Cosimo? Well, yes, but on one condition, said his mother. What's the condition? Asked Guíligan. That I can go too. Everybody laughed. Guíligan, his mother, Cosimo, and his elves all climbed into the sleigh. Not all of the elves fit in the vehicle with all the toys that Chris had put into it, so most of the elves had to get out again. There were several complaints and a lot of grumblings as they did so. "Now," said Chris after they were ready, "you all will deliver the presents to the kids here in the north. I will take care of the southern hemisphere because it's a bit more complicated over there. It's really hot in those parts, so I will have to exchange my sleigh for a motorboat and wear my bathing suit." Cosimo barely had time to express his agreement when, at his brother's order, Rudolph and the moose started to run. In a few moments they took off, carrying the sleigh behind them. The passengers struggled to stay on board because the ride was a lot rougher than their experience from a few minutes before in Chris's sleigh. And it was no wonder, because the moose had never worked as a team before, much less as a flying team. Besides that, the structure of the sleigh was not very aerodynamic and had stability problems. Remember the thing about the unequal sides? The night passed in a blur of activity. At first, Cosimo felt slow and clumsy, but Chris's elves helped him, and little by little he started to get the hang of it. The first time that he found a plate of cookies labeled "To Santa," he wanted to take a break and eat them, but Titchy gave him a bag. "Take them with you," he said. "We don't have time now." So, from that moment on, Cosimo took all the cookies that he found in the houses and put them in the bag. The sun was already rising when they arrived at the last house. Before they could get down the chimney, they heard a little girl yell, "Mommy, Daddy, it's Christmas morning already, but I can't find any presents from Santa Claus." They had arrived too late. Cosimo felt a heavy sensation in his stomach as he realized that he had failed his brother. Then Itchy disappeared, and Cosimo felt even worse. How could the elf abandon him right now? But in a moment, Itchy returned with a little kitty that he had found in the street. "This little guy needs a home," he explained. Hastily, Itchy looked around in the sleigh and found a ribbon and a tag. He wrote on the tag, "For Daisy, from Santa Claus," tied the ribbon around the cat's neck, and so quickly that Cosimo couldn't see it, he put the cat inside of the house. They didn't have to wait very long before they heard the girl's cries of joy. "Mummy, Daddy, look at the pretty kitty Santa gave me." They didn't hear the reply of Daisy's parents, though. Cosimo hoped they didn't have any problem with having a pet in their home. The sleigh was already flying rapidly toward his house in the woods. When they arrived, Chris was already there, waiting for them, along with all the sad and mopey elves who had had to stay behind. "Good news," said Cosimo, as they piled out of the sleigh. "We have cookies." With a great effort, he pulled the bag over the side of the sleigh. The elves immediately cheered up and started to celebrate. At least they would eat cookies. "What a night to remember," squeaked Guíligan, jumping down from the sleigh. "I wish we could do it again." "You can go again next year. I'm sure Cosimo could use you as a permanent helper." "Next year?" said Cosimo. "Why not? I could use a partner. It's a big job to do it by myself. What do you say?" All the elves, Guíligan, and even Guíligan's mother started to chant, "Yes, do it! Do it!" Cosimo smiled. "It would be an honor to share your work, brother," he said. Everyone shouted for joy. They celebrated throughout the day and late into the night. Everyone ate so many cookies that, in the end, they didn't think they would ever want to eat another cookie again in their lives. But the next year, of course, their appetite for cookies had returned in full force. Ever since then, Cosimo has been helping his twin brother, Chris, every year to deliver all the presents that good boys and girls find on Christmas morning. So if you hear jingling bells this Christmas Eve night, don't be so sure that it's Santa Claus. It could be his twin brother, Cosimo, with his unusual sleigh, guided by a team of flying moose from the Canadian wilderness. Written by Annette Vidal Roth. Read by Annette Vidal Roth. Images generated by CG Dream AI, which is probably operated by elves.